So, Fiacre, we're talking about rights and responsibilities and social justice. I suppose, do you want to maybe start us off by giving your understanding, your description of what rights are and what responsibility means?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose to me, human rights are the things that we're all entitled to. They're I think they're inalienable. Every single person in the world, regardless of who you are, what you look like, where you're from, and how much money you have, that's something you are absolutely entitled to. And I suppose what they are to me are, they're a framework, and they're a way of ensuring that everyone in society, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized in particular, but everyone really is being looked after, and that their basic entitlements are being met. And like there's so many of them. There's freedom from discrimination, your right to safety, right to asylum, right to your nationality, right to protection, the right to protest, and then the right to be treated with dignity. They're just some of them. And I suppose they're they sound lofty, they sound aspirational, but they're very real, and they're things that actually make a huge, meaningful difference in people's lives. That this framework of human rights. So what we're really thinking about here is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. So that was 73 years ago, and it's a framework for working towards achieving that sort of society. I suppose a socially just society, really, where people's rights are vindicated.
Yeah, and I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is like sort of a key moment in history, as sort of where the nations of the world came together and said, okay, well, what do we need in order to have a world that's harmonious? What do we need in order to have societies that are, as you said, are socially just? And they settled on these 30 articles of rights and responsibilities as well. Obviously, because a right implies a responsibility. But they didn't just come out of nowhere. I think is a really interesting point. Like, a lot of people seem to think, they keep on talking about the Universal Declaration as if it was the first thing ever, but obviously that came out of a long period of different societies grappling with this idea of how do you organize society in such a way that people have rights and people have responsibilities, so that we're able to be good neighbors, that we're able to live together, that we're able to know what we're entitled to and know what's expected of us. And I suppose that's where, to my mind, human rights really are central to the whole idea of social justice. Because I always understood social justice to mean people being given what they're entitled to, and people being, the classic definition of giving a person what's due to them. Is so maybe if you want to, what do you think of that, Fiacre?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. And I suppose I think, like you said, it was the 1948 Declaration was, I suppose, a culmination of centuries of human progress and human development. And it was also 3 years after the end of the Second World War. The first 50 years of the 20th century was awful things happened. You had the First World War, you had the Second World War, you had the Spanish influenza, you had uprisings, and you had coups, and you had famines. And I suppose when there was just so much violence, there, at the end of it all, there had to be a recognition that we need a better way of doing things. Because I think broadly society maybe understood that people should be treated equally, but there was always caveats that some people are more equal than others. If you're a property owner, you're probably treated a bit more equally. If you're a man, you're absolutely treated more equally. In some countries, if you were a Protestant or if you were a Catholic, you were treated better. And then obviously, in the case of, I suppose, Nazi Germany, we saw how Jewish people were persecuted, and with the entire genocide there, and how other marginalized groups were too. So there was a recognition that the idea that we're all equal needs to be fleshed out a bit more. That needed a I'd say a framework, which I think the Human Rights Declaration is. It's not just saying things in an abstract. It's saying there are 30 articles. These are inalienable, and we as a global society need to actually work towards achieving them. And it's not saying that the world since 1948 has been perfect. It's been far from perfect, but it did set a standard that we should be working towards. And I suppose the important thing now is that if say there's a genocide, or if people are being persecuted, or there's government repression, it's not just saying, oh, well, there's a bad thing happening in that country. It's saying that people's rights are being violated, and that's totally different, because that's universal. There's no stuff of, oh, well, the local context there, or the local context here. It's very simple. If people's right to be free from discrimination, or the right to safety, or the right to protest is being prevented, that is a violation of their universal human rights. And there's no coming back from that. So the international community often maybe doesn't quite stand up to the ideals of the 1948 Declaration. They find ways around it, but it's there. I think the United Nations as a forum is a place where you're saying those rights need to be vindicated, and it's crucially then it's a process where we as people, as part of society, actually have to work towards holding those in power, whether that's in Ireland or at a global level, to account, to ensure they're actually working towards vindicating those rights. Just maybe that's kind of something maybe, I don't know if you'd have more to say about that, who, in terms of rights, when they're being vindicated, is it all just on us as individuals, or how do you think rights should be vindicated?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think we're not just individuals, we live in society. I think you hit on a point there earlier, that the whole point of rights and responsibilities is that it's unsustainable without them. When you look at the last, as you said, the first 50 years of the Second World War, you can see what happened, or the first 50 years of the 20th century culminating in the Second World War.
Yeah.
You can see what happens whenever a gang of criminals like the Nazis take control of a country like Germany. But even without going to that sort of extreme, even if you go to you take a democratic society like the United States or Great Britain, at the turn of the 20th century, like you said, not everybody had rights, so not all rights were equal. But the whole question is how do you extend these rights? And it's okay, it's up to us as citizens to seek these rights, but ultimately it's the responsibility of government, as the legal leaders of the nation, to vindicate those rights. We as people are rights holders. We all are sovereign individuals. We all have those, like you said, inalienable human rights, and it's the responsibility of the state to vindicate those rights. And that might mean taxation, that might mean regulation, that might mean new laws, that might mean that there's a higher rate of tax and a lower rate of tax depending on what you earn, because obviously, as we said, all throughout history, some people have had more rights than other people, and some people had an edge or an advantage that other people didn't have. And the danger is whenever people use that advantage and use that edge in order to give themselves power over others, and to turn themselves into an elite in society. And there's always going to be wealthy people, and there's always going to be people who aren't wealthy. But unfortunately, probably there's always going to be some level of poverty that that we're trying to deal with in society. And it's really, really important that we always try to deal with that. But the key thing is that you don't allow, or that an elite doesn't emerge who are able to sort of take control of things. So I think, yeah, rights and responsibilities, it's up to government to try to ensure that all people's rights are respected, because that's the only way that we are able to live in harmony. That's the only way you can have a sustainable society. And I think that idea of sustainability is really important. Like, what sort of society will last? What sort of society isn't just going to descend into chaos? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but sustainability
Yeah,
and chaos and stuff.
I mean, I think it in a way it maybe comes back to some of the stuff you were saying about responsibility. And I suppose I think it's Article 29 in the Declaration. It says, just reading it here, due recognition and respect for the rights and freedom to others. So it's that we have rights, but we also, our rights can't trump other people's rights, or the pursuit of, our right to freedom can't trump someone's right to discrimination. So there is that balancing act, and I think you really touched on it there about responsibility on government. But I wonder, I suppose we both work kind of a global space, and is there a greater responsibility on people living in the global north? So the global north being those really the countries kind of north of the equator, where about 80% of the wealth is. So you're talking really about Europe, North America, and then you'd obviously include places like Australia in that as well. Well, the global south would include most of Asia and Africa and South America, where most of the people in the world are, about 80% of the people, but only about 20% of the wealth. And I suppose we're seeing now, in a COVID-19 context where, we as societies in the global north, where we've obviously suffered massively because of COVID, but we're also first in the queue to get the vaccine. And probably everyone in Ireland will have the vaccine by the end of 2021, while people in the likes of, say, Mozambique could be waiting till 2022, 2023. And like, that's massively unfair. And it's not just like young, healthy people that aren't getting it. It's vulnerable people. It's people with pre-existing conditions. It's people that, if they got COVID, could very well die. So I just wonder, because, obviously there's plenty of people living in poverty in the global north, but it is relative poverty. We have a lot more privilege. We have a lot more advantages. And, look, we sit here, I suppose, as, two educated, white middle-class men, for want of a better word. So like, is there an onus on individuals with privilege or relative privilege to have greater responsibility than those that have, I suppose, no privilege at all?
Yeah, I would definitely argue that. Like, I think that the old quote from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. But like, it's true. Like, the whole point is that society, like, we're not individuals. We're, despite what Thatcher said when she said, there's no such thing in society, we're all individuals. Yeah, we are all individuals, but we're also live together, live in harmony. Or we strive to live in harmony, at least. So like, yeah, like, we have to have a responsibility. We have to be responsible. Like you said, that article, Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, speaks about responsibility, and without that article as sort of the keystone, it holds all the other articles in the Declaration together. So yeah, we do have responsibility, and as well as, it's not just that we as citizens are sovereign individuals living in a society, and then we elect our government, and our government is responsible for organizing our society. So we're people, individuals, and we live in community. But also as countries, we're a community of nations. So I don't believe that a society can last. I don't believe a society is sustainable if you have an elite living in the lap of luxury, and you have a huge section of the population living in destitution or living in poverty, or where their rights are being undermined or denied. And by the same token, I don't think the global community is sustainable if a handful of countries in the global north, in North America, in Europe, in parts of Asia, and also, of course, as we said, Australia, New Zealand, like, we can't live as if the rest of the world doesn't exist. We can't just behave as if we don't have neighbors in the world. Of course we do. And I think the Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations as a platform, as an institution for trying to build a world where rights are respected and where rights are guaranteed. I think that's a really, really important forum. But it is up to, as you said, those who have to take responsibility in order to work towards a world where we eliminate a situation where there are haves and have-nots. And I think that's also where there's a really, really important question then about equality and inequality. It's not enough, I think, to talk about rights and vindicating rights. We also then have to address the whole question of, well, what does justice look like, and what does fairness mean, and what is equality? And is it sustainable to have a world where there's massive inequality? I don't know if you maybe want to speak a little bit about that, Fiachra, or even just maybe talking about the Sustainable Development Goals as well, for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose just supposed to respond to what you were saying. I think we've figured out in the last several years that inequality doesn't work. It's not good for society. It's also not good for the economy, because in the long run, this huge, massive inequality doesn't lead to strong economic growth. It doesn't lead to successful countries, and so we do need a new way forward, especially in the context of, I suppose, climate chaos, where we need to find solutions that aren't destroying the planet for short-term gain. And I suppose that kind of leads us to discussing the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, which are, they're 17 goals. They were agreed in 2015 by 193 countries. Ireland and Kenya were very involved negotiating the final stages. So I think in Ireland, I suppose we feel we have a bit of a personal stake in the goals. And I suppose, and again, as a wealthy country, we have a lot of responsibility to ensure they're implemented. The global goals are global in nature. It's not just about looking at progress in, say, the countries where CERV works, like Mozambique or Zimbabwe or Zambia. It's also about looking at progress in Ireland. And I suppose we as CERV as an organization have to do both. And I suppose it's the exact same with yourselves. It's about looking at what's being achieved in Zimbabwe, but it's also what's being achieved in Ireland, because otherwise it doesn't work. And I suppose it's that idea of sustainability, where a sustainable, socially just world is one where we're all striving for better. And I suppose, to me, social justice is people's rights. People have equal access to their rights, and they're all treated equally. But also that, to me, there's a struggle in there. There's a process of trying to actually make that better world. It's not just an abstract ideal of, oh well, we want social justice. Instead, it's the very concrete reality of, we need social justice to vindicate our rights and to actually have a better quality of life. And I suppose we see that we see that in Ireland, and I think we see that with, say, our partners, for example, Young Africa and Zimbabwe and Mozambique, where on a very practical level they're working to ensure that people have a right to an education, a right to access to services, a right to social mobility. And that's all the new way, or it's not really the new way, but the way we're striving to do that is with the SDGs, the global goals, as that roadmap. And I think, a bit like the Universal Declaration, a bit like social justice as a concept, there's a lot of abstract stuff, but it's very concrete. There's objectives, there's targets, it's measurable. So I think that the global goals are good, they put social justice at the heart of it. Some might say they aren't perfect. I don't know. Would you have issues with the global goals, or do you think they're a good roadmap for, I suppose, achieving social justice at a global level?
Yeah, I think they're a really, really useful roadmap. I think the key thing there is that they're useful. I think you mentioned before, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is 73 years old, was a set of ideals, and very lofty ideals. But they were more than just ideals. They were supposed to be the practical things that allow us to live together in society in a sustainable way, so that we have some harmony. Because without harmony, you end up getting conflict, and eventually that explodes into violence. the Sustainable Development Goal, but just on the human rights, they were set out in a list, and that was that. There was no way of thinking about, well, how do we actually achieve them? I think what the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 does is it sets out, okay, well, how do we now reach a point where we actually have practically made those rights effective? Because it's not much good saying that you have a right if you don't have the resources to actually achieve that right, to live that right, to experience that right. You can have a right to education, but I mean, if you live in a place where you don't have access to a school, or where the resources in your school mean that you don't get the same quality of education as somebody living in a very wealthy neighborhood, and whether that's in Ireland or whether that's in Mozambique, then your right to education isn't really being fully realized. So it's important to allocate resources like that properly. And it's important, and I think what the SDGs do is that they look at how we allocate our resources. And you're right when you say there's a kind of a struggle in that, because I think the whole question of rights and responsibilities, there's a balancing to be had there. And that's a political question. And once you get to the whole idea of allocating resources and targets, and we're going to achieve this goal by a certain date, that means, well, we need to spend money and we need to put people on the job of achieving that goal by that date. That's a political question, and politics is an arena of struggle. That doesn't mean it's a violent arena. Like the whole idea of democracy is that we struggle with one another in order to achieve our objectives, but we do it in a peaceful manner, and we do it in a manner that's lawful. And I think that's another key point about the Sustainable Development Goals and the human rights, is that they're trying to create a society that's lawful, and a society where there's security. So I don't know if you have any ideas about that, or about particularly maybe about, well, what's required of us as individuals.
I suppose that's what I was just thinking there. We're sitting here talking about things in very high level, but like I said, it's actually affecting people's lives. But what can people in Ireland do? I think they can do an awful lot. Like we're in a particularly advantageous position in Ireland. We're a wealthy country that are able to contribute a lot of resources towards development, both in Ireland but also overseas. And I suppose Ireland currently has that seat on the UN Security Council for the next 2 years, which is massively important, massively significant. But look, as individual people, small steps make a huge difference. Whatever saying you want to use, Rome wasn't built in a day, or I'm sure there's a shanachal, but I think Irish politicians have used them to death over the last 12 months, so I won't subject us to any of them right now. But I suppose the strength in numbers would be the easiest one, where as individuals, as people, like you said, we're part of a community, and as a community we can make a big difference. Practically, that's about engaging with those around us about the big issues of the day. So I think the stuff that's kind of come up is, say, for example, access to the vaccine. In Ireland it's happening slowly but surely. We're getting there. It's not happening in a lot of countries in the global south, whether that's Mozambique or Zimbabwe or Zambia or the Philippines or any of the countries where we work. Progress has been very, very slow. And one of the reasons for that is that the wealthy countries have sucked up all the vaccine for themselves, and they're in a rush to give it to healthy people that could actually wait a little longer. And I suppose something you talked about before was sustainability, and it's not sustainable, because if we're all vaccinated, that's grand, but it still won't be safe for people around the world. That's going to cause future lockdowns. That's going to cause future outbreaks. There's every chance the virus could mutate. So it doesn't even make sense. Yeah. So I suppose I would be saying to people, if you're listening, get involved in that. Do a bit of reading. Oxfam at the minute have a petition going. I suppose it's quite a global petition calling for action on this. So sign the petition, look into it, do a bit of reading, engage with your family members about it, and actually talk to them about how it is a global response. It can't be localized to Ireland or to Europe. And then get involved in the political process, because ultimately politicians have a lot of the power and they have a lot of the responsibility, but we can influence them. So write them a letter, send them a tweet, and get out there and get your voice heard. So I suppose that would be the big thing that's standing out to me right now, is the real pressing thing that's needed. You know, we need to vindicate people's, you know, right to be treated equally, which in the case of the vaccine rollout is not happening. We're not treating people equally. We're not prioritizing those in most need on a global scale. And I think we need to do something about that.
Definitely. Like, I mean, our government can't just say that, well, we're only responsible for our people. I mean, sure, that's their primary responsibility. But I mean, you know, the whole point of diplomacy is to try to build a world where you have security. And like you said, that has to be a sustainable world where people are, where people's rights are vindicated. And there's no point in having, you know, Ireland vaccinated if huge sections of the world are left unvaccinated. And either two things can happen. You know, as you mentioned, the virus will mutate, or the other thing that happens is that the global economy isn't able to recover. You know, so it's a threat to our well-being if people in other parts of the world aren't vaccinated as well. And I think that's the key thing, is to get away from the individualistic way of seeing things to seeing the bigger picture. You know, to seeing that we actually do live in a community. And in terms of politics, you know, and political engagement, I think, yeah, okay, yeah, as you said, politicians are the people with power, and the government are the duty bearer. You know, we're the rights holders; they're the duty bearer. But at the same time, you know, politics is bigger than that and broader than that, and it's about civic engagement and civic participation. And you know, I think in all walks of life and in all aspects about rights and responsibilities, I think a vibrant, civically engaged society, where people are, you know, engaging in their own community, their own community development, is important, because that also sets the scene. That's the ecology within which then we're able to become better citizens in terms of the national issue and the international issues.
Yeah.
So I think it's like that idea of, you know, think globally and act locally. You know, which I know Serve are running a program on.
It's funny you should say that.
you might want to segue into talking about that.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, like we do have to kind of, you need to see the bigger picture, but you have to act locally. So that might be writing a letter to your TD rather than writing a letter to the Secretary General of the UN, because, you know, your TD is more likely to listen to you. But equally, it means that, you know, I think we're all able to work towards social justice by all recognizing that we want to create in our own communities, and our own neighborhoods and amongst the people that we live with, a sense of rights and responsibilities, as not just being about a matter of political opinion, or economic opinion for that matter, but actually about kind of seeing that, well, these are the things that we need to live together in harmony. This is what we need for security. This is what we need in order to hopefully have a situation where everybody is able to reach their fulfillment. You know, human flourishing is what human flourishing is what our objective should be. Like, people shouldn't talk about, you know, the floor below which anybody, you know, we don't want anybody fall. It's also important to actually make sure that there's no glass ceiling there either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose something that's kind of, when we're thinking about our local community, and trying to affect change, something that's really important to me is, you know, listening to others, you know. And I think crucially, and there's been a lot of learning about this over the last year, is to listen to others, you know, from diverse backgrounds and from marginalized groups, from underrepresented groups, and you know, listen to people, you know, and like not in just a throwaway sense, but really listen to what the issues people have and the solutions that are there. And I think, you know, we saw that, say, with the Black Lives Matter movement, which was putting issues on the agenda in Ireland that both locally and the national level just weren't being listened to. And I think, unfortunately, some of those issues still aren't being taken on board by some people in positions of power, and that's something that needs to be worked on over time. But yeah, I suppose just to kind of following what you said about think global, act local, that's something in Serve we're trying to do. We're developing a new program called Think Global, Act Local. Surprise, surprise. And really, it's about global learning. It's about learning about issues of justice, of solidarity, and then also trying to look towards finding solutions. And how we do that is by giving people the opportunity to volunteer, whether that's virtually with Serve's overseas partners or actually in your local community as well, so that you're not just learning about the issues and not doing anything. You're actually learning, and you're going out there and you're trying to do something about it. What you can do in a COVID context is difficult, it's constrained, but it doesn't mean you can't affect change. And I think, again, say going back to all the stuff that happened, say from summer onwards, the Black Lives Matters protests in Ireland, we saw that, you know, a group of people coming together both virtually and in person were actually able to put an issue on the agenda, even in a time of, you know, a pandemic where we thought people's attention was elsewhere. But, you know, there is an ability to listen, there's a compassion, and I suppose as, you know, as social justice advocates, that's one of the probably most important things we can do is, you know, to listen to people and try and find constructive solutions to, you know, vindicating everyone's rights while also exercising our responsibilities, you know, as people who, you know, living in Ireland, we all have a certain amount of relative privilege, and to, you know, acknowledge that and realize that, and, you know, work within that framework to trying to achieve change.